With me today is Dr. Stefan Olbrich, who is our research scientist at Accepto in machine learning, Chris Goff, who is the lead solution architect on the healthcare with Intel Corporation, and Neil Naster, who is the CEO of Cohort Intelligence, leading revolutionary company who is focused on using AI and ML for advancing the clinical trials. First of all, I want to thank you, Anthony and team, and particularly for your beautiful present. I think it's very thoughtful and so Anthony. So thank you. So we're going to focus first on something that the title of the session is How We Did It, or How We Are Doing It. Stefan is going to go ahead and talk a little bit about how we are doing using machine learning in detection of anomalies and abnormalities and action recognition in the hospitals, in the patient room. And Neil is going to talk about the use of AI/ML in the world of clinical trials and advancing the capabilities that this company is driving forward. And Chris from Intel is going to tell us about the fantastic work that Intel and the affiliates and companies that they have acquired are doing on computer vision, particularly, which is part of the talk. And I think that hopefully you'll have enough time for any questions and answers. The title of the talk is an audacious goal of eliminating preventable harm. And I think that this whole team that is here, all of you who have attended from different places in the world, is hopefully you will have a common goal such as this audacious goal, which is our objective who are involved in healthcare and we're trying to use machine learning and artificial intelligence is exactly that, those three words: eliminate preventable harm. Now, a little bit of, you're in a beautiful setting in Dana Point, one of the most beautiful places in California. I have a request for 10 seconds that I want you to actually close your eyes, and I can't ever sit down and present it, so I'm going to go ahead and stand up. For 10 seconds, I want every one of you to kindly close your eyes and imagine the top 3 reasons of why humans lose their life to different diseases. The top 3 diseases that are cause of death. And I tell you why after you imagine your top 3 choices. I didn't mean to make it to Friday afternoon with this stuff, but there's a reason for it. The top 7 reasons, hopefully your top 3 are listed in here. The top one obviously is heart disease and stroke to talk to and respiratory issues. But take a look at the 7 and identify the 3 that you imagine as the top 3 reasons. And then map to why we're here. And what is AI means. And how many of these 7 can be eliminated and prevented because of the fact that we process data the right way and we understand the data and use predictive analytics to what we call eliminate preventable harm. I hope how many of you, your 3 are in this list. Does this cover your top 3? By the way, those are the top 7 numbers researched as overall over the globe, the reason that it exists.
Would medical error come in there as well?
Medical error. Unfortunately, it doesn't, actually from the top of my head, it didn't even make the top 10. However, Stefan is going to talk about the medical error as far as in the context of hospital-acquired infection, which to some level covers the medical error. But very good comment. One of the definitely medical errors is one of those low-hanging fruits that with right intelligence and use of machine learning and extra of human expertise and the machine expertise, we can definitely reduce the medical errors. And thank you for asking that question, because Jeff is going to talk about eliminating preventable harm within the context of hospital-acquired infections and errors that happens, which is cause of some of this is because of errors. Now, it is an amazing world we live in. AI/ML is a word, and I stole this slide credit to the CEO of Basecamp and the founder of Basecamp. He has a dollar sign instead of AI/ML, but I stole it. Everybody thinks that if you use AI/ML, you will get a unicorn. The reality is there are a lot of things that happens in between, and it takes much more than just thinking that AI/ML is the solution for everything. Both Stefan and Chris will tell you about that it's not about only machine learning, but it's about a mixture of experts, including the machine expertise as well as the human experts. So it's about coexistence and cooperation of the humans and the people who are experts in medical practices and our practitioners and the machine learning. So not every pony can become a unicorn because of the AI/ML. And yes, winter is coming. For those of you who think that the winter of AI is coming, because sometimes setting expectation without realization and being pragmatic can be disastrous. Hopefully this crowd is going to prevent it. So there's no doubt that there's going to be a significant factor that is going to be played by the injection of AI/ML into the future of the precision medicine. And the advantage of AI/ML is going to be actually expressed today in 2 or 3 examples that the team is going to give you, and hopefully we'll have some questions for them. But naturally, because of that intelligence, set aside the comment about not everything with AI/ML is going to become a unicorn. But if it is properly used, for sure we're going to be able to eliminate preventable harm. And it takes a huge amount of effort and a significant number of research scientists across the globe in order to reinvent the way that we are going to do our precision medicine going forward, from clinical trials all the way to the patient rooms and to the houses of our elderly when we want to do remote care for them. With that, I already introduced you. Unfortunately, Lakeland Health could not be here today. She's just going to talk about some of the work that we are doing with them. And I'm going to go ahead and let Stefan to take over the presentation and give you an overview of what we're doing.
Sure. So despite the winter that's apparently approaching soon, artificial intelligence and machine learning is revolutionizing the industry. So that is in most obvious cases ranging from autonomous driving to cybersecurity, and we're reaching a point where computers are better at vision processes, for instance. They are better at recognizing objects and actions faster than you and I can do. Even in the top domain of humans, so understanding natural spoken languages, we're making very good progress and are close to achieving the level of humans. Also, machine learning is able to detect correlations and specialities in data that is so high-dimensional that a human cannot even process it anymore. In the end, they are much faster, probably more economic, and they can process different and much more complex set of input data. Nevertheless, we think they are not a replacement for humans, but they do a really great job as a system. So in my, well, that's doubtful in my personal opinion, in medicine, artificial intelligence is still largely entering an uncharted territory. So we have solutions which are really impressive in, for instance, detecting cancers in MRT images. But in general, I think we're still missing a holistic approach. So an end-to-end solution that covers every aspect that happens in a hospital to prevent or to realize the vision of the elimination of preventable harm. And one of the most reasons I see behind this is that the data diagnostic is very heterogeneous, coming from imagery data to patient health information. It's very, very diverse and it's in a very, very large volume. And it's fragmented. Also, metrics for patient safety change from region to region, especially from country to country. So what we're trying to achieve in the group here is that we create a system that really cover every aspect of what we can do to improve the safety of the patient in the hospital. So we will show that in case of 2 or 3 use cases. So the first one is done conceptual with the clinical partner, Lakeland Health, and it's about a system that assists people monitoring patients. The second one, presented by Neil, will be about natural language processing and data mining for precise messaging. And all that one is powered by our industry partner that gives us the hardware to drive all this computational intensive processes. So I want to start with MPC, the first project by the clinical partner, and that's a project that's based on activity recognition. So we monitor the patient, and in case that we detect an abnormality in the behavior, imagine that you're recovering from a knee surgery and you wake up, still sedated, and your urge is going to the bathroom, which is probably a bad idea to get out of bed at the moment. We would recognize that you're trying to that you go in a sitting position and that you turn your body, which probably translate into getting out of bed. The next step, then we would approach with send signals, so we would detect this event, and somebody supervising and monitoring you would try to get in touch with you, or automatically a voice will tell you, please go back to bed, somebody's coming for you. Or if a person requires help, we can detect the system. So this is basically a system that has incorporates monitoring and predictive analysis in the hospital, but also can be translated to patient care at home. So in the end, MCC, the concrete project we're doing there, is a fall risk prevention smart audio-video solution. So it's intended to be very cost efficient, and we chose to apply modern web technologies on top of a backend that applies artificial intelligence machine learning. Also, we support mobile devices just to increase the flexibility and to make the friction for the clinical staff as simple as possible. So imagine that you have to go to the patient visit and you just pick up your watch and you can see whether the patient is asleep. So you probably reschedule, let him recover, go to somebody else. The technique that we requires is that we install in each patient room small hardware devices, so small form factor computationals that passively cool, that risk, that don't make any noise, that are hidden away from the patient, and transparently provide a lot of features like that. We can even provide multimedia for the patients and feed the television in the room, and also enable the way of the means for communicating with the patient, and do all the computational intensive processes like machine learning, inference with the help of technology directly in the patient room. So we don't even need centralized services for that. Only the extracted, inferred information is processed in the central site. Unfortunately, I cannot show the real patient stream, so there's not a lot to bring actual data from the hospital, but it gives you a small overview about how the telecity part, so in a central telemetry room where somebody is monitoring around the clock high-risk patients, what you would see, how the workflow would look. So we make a survey also with the personnel there and listen to the desires, how to improve our product for them. So in the upper left, you will have usually competing products right now. They offer you to watch up to 12 streams at a time. So you can monitor 12 persons all night long. This option we still have. But as our system is computer-assisted, it means if you're not watching constantly, you cannot well, you can only watch a limited number of video streams at the same time and see what's going on there. While the machine assists you, it looks at the patient and interprets what he's doing. So at the moment he tries to get up, he requires help or does anything he's not supposed to do, the system alerts the operator and assists him as quickly as possible to intervene in the situation. And for that we have also the possibility to give the operator the focus on specialized rooms, and it can, in the end, our system can survey much more rooms at the same time because we increase the efficiency of the personnel at that moment. Summarized, the system is very scalable, so we can increase a lot the number of cameras that somebody can observe. And we have very extensible and customized user interface, so we approach the hospital staff to listen to their needs. One instance is that, for instance, that they complained in competing systems that they were so low that if somebody's coughing, they turn deaf, and we were able to install noise cancelling in this point. We have mobile support, which makes it much more easier for the medical and clinical personnel to communicate. We can also integrate with existing communication systems so that calling another person will be very, very easy. And we are working together with Neil to integrate all the intelligence he derives from, you'll talk about that in a second, from patient data, and make our system much more tailored to the use case of the patient. Automatically be able to detect what is a situation that could lead to harm on a patient-centric basis. Okay, with that I would like to pass the word to Neil.
Sure, thank you.
By the way, Neil, you don't have to stand up. I just cannot talk unless I move my hands. And
can you hear me? Okay, great. Oh, perfect. So I'll tell you about what we're doing today at Cohort, and our mission is to deliver more preventable care, including the option of clinical trials across a greater population of eligible patients that's previously been able to be done before. And I'll tell you why that's actually important. I'll give you some background on that. First, our company has been focused, our team has been focused on understanding clinical language for many years, starting back in 1999 when one of our co-founders started a company called CodeWrite, where NLP was being used on the coding, on improving coding. So we really see that there's an important role here for clinical natural language processing and AI to better understand and surface clinical concepts from patient records, because a significant portion of it is in unstructured data. And I'll talk about then the challenge of how do you then reconcile that information with other information such as structured information and historical billing, and why that becomes important. So today, one of the challenges is that, for example, a primary care physician can have a few thousand, anywhere from 2,500 to almost 4,000 patients on their panel. And that makes going through all of the records very difficult, a manual labor task. When you then combine that with the fact that many times problem lists can be out of date, there's not necessarily any one person dedicated to making sure they're up to date or that they're maintained. You have a lot of information in the notes, such as diagnoses, medications, side effects, procedures, that oftentimes can very easily get overlooked. And then when you can factor in the fact that the physician may only see a fraction of those patients in a year, you see that there's a number of patients that can easily go overlooked. Beyond that, the EHR is increasing in terms of data complexity. There's a lot more cut and paste. It does double duty in terms of billing, as well as quality measures such as MIPS and MACRA. So all of this makes it more complex, and it continues to increase in complexity. And as you look at in the next 10 years, there's a shortage of primary care physicians. The Medicare population is going to be doubling, particularly for those that have 2 or more chronic conditions. And so you just see a significant amount of workload and a diminishing ability to be able to manage that complexity. And so what we do is we work with practices today. We integrate with their EHR, and using our system, we're able to identify patients across complex clinical criteria. In the case of care management, we'll find patients that have 2 or more chronic conditions out of over 70. We will reconcile information that's in the notes, problem lists, medication lists, and other structured data to identify those patients that are then eligible for care management. And then one of the differences with us is that besides just providing the insights, because practices often have very little time, they're so busy from the physician to the entire staff, we also provide the services to get those patients enrolled, get them to have care management. We provide all those services, and then all of that information that we elicit from the care management process in terms of setting goals based on what conditions and comorbidities they have, all of the information that we start to generate, we actually send back into the EHR. So the physician now has a view using their existing EHR user interface, no new software that they have to learn. They now start to see their patients that are enrolled in these care management programs, and they can start to see and track their progress. So this is something that we're doing today. And we use a workflow. It's easy to use. It augments information from the problem list to show which problems are relevant for that particular care program, whether it's behavioral health or chronic care management. We also identify, for example, if a patient is eligible for a clinical trial. We will also highlight the clinical concepts that were surfaced and why they're relevant. And this makes it very easy for people who, with minimal training, to start using our workflow. And part of what we're doing there is then we're enabling in parts of our workflow to have the care managers or the clinical trial associates elicit information from the patients, such as medications that they may have but are not listed in the EHR, or signs or symptoms or other insights, and have our system learn from those results. And this is we've built our team. A number of our people have come from our previous companies, and some of the lessons that we've learned in terms of how important it is to be able to ingest and leverage clinical guidelines. So that means things such as congestive heart failure, not just looking for the terms congestive heart failure, but looking for the major and minor criteria based on, for example, the Framingham Heart guideline, so that we can detect not just terms, but actual complex clinical concepts. And what does this mean? When we talk with practices, we're not selling AI. What we're saying is that we're going to help you enroll more patients than you otherwise would into care management, and in 30 days of going live, we're going to generate new revenue. We're going to enable all the documentation, the compliance, the processes in place, so that now you can actually bill Medicare or your payer for these services. And even that last step, what we found is that practices don't even have the time oftentimes to do the revenue cycle component. So we actually integrate with their practice management system. We form the bill, we form the claim, that gets sent out. So we now have a track record of, once we go live in 30 days, patients are in the care management program and practices start to see an ROI. And we think this is important because what we're doing is we're bringing AI to sophisticated practices, but also practices in rural Alabama and South Carolina and other places that other practices that normally wouldn't have the balance sheet to pay for advanced AI. And what we've also been able to show is that with that one integration, we can now provide other care management options. And one of them is there's a growing movement amongst some providers that clinical trials can be applied as a care option. So in one example, in this rural practice, an hour and a half away from the closest airport, we identified patients for 2 different trials. They had never done clinical trials before. We set them up with a site management organization with 25 years of experience in clinical trials. And from there, we were able to identify patients for 2 different trials, including a trial that was somewhat complex, a fatty liver disease trial. And the sponsor decided to fly out, and then within 30 days, they approved them for both of those trials. And today, that site management organization now is both the first to enroll and the highest enrolling site in the country. So we really see that there's an opportunity here to not just help improve the identification of patients for clinical trials, but to bring it to a broader audience in terms of practices. And then at the same time, we're continuously monitoring the EHR so that we can identify protocol violations and adverse events and other things that are important to the sponsors and the CROs. So this is a summary. You know, in the end, we're really, what we found for the providers, at least the ones we were talking with, is that we don't start with AI as our conversation. We talk about improving outcomes, reducing their time that they have to spend on administrative and other aspects of their day so that they can be freed up to spend more quality time with their patients, and helping them see that there's a way for them to generate new revenues, which is very important for some of the practices out there, which in some cases can be struggling. So thanks for taking this time, and I encourage you to talk more about this.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Goff. I'm the Chief Solution Architect for Intel's Health and Life Sciences organization. The role of our team is really to take the wealth of technology that Intel is producing and has deployed and is coming, but then to work closely with partners and industry to really meet the needs of the various sub-industries in health and life sciences, so payer, provider, pharma, research and academia, and so forth. So what you see here are some of the main challenges that we see with precision medicine in our industry. You know, the first is data. You know, it wasn't that long ago when the majority of clinical records were still in paper form. Now it's largely electronic in this country. But there is a lot of data to manage, not just in health records, but there's omics data, there's claims data, personal data that patients themselves collect, and so forth. How do you manage this? How do you normalize it? This gets into data governance, data management, which is some of the foundational challenges to AI and analytics. The second is the shortage of specialists. There are a growing number of people who need care. If you look at the demographics across the world and the percentage of people that are going to be over the age of 65, those people who largely have comorbidities or chronic diseases, that percent is increasing. There is less and less time for the clinical specialists to spend with each individual patient. So how can we use technology to make these clinical end users more efficient? And then cost is always a huge challenge. 3.3 trillion, 18% of the US GDP in healthcare. So how can we use machine learning, artificial intelligence, or technology in general to make the industry more efficient and help address some of these challenges? I think the use case that Stefan talked about is a really good example of this. Fall prevention in the hospital using video analytics and machine learning. The standard of care in many hospitals, you might have some represented in this room, for a fall risk patient is to actually have an employee sit in that room during the duration of their stay to see if they wake up and then help them if they need assistance. By using machine learning, by using computer vision, can we monitor all the fall risk patients in the hospital or all the patients in the hospital and make that a much more efficient use case. Of course, that applies across the board to a wide variety of use cases. It's our belief that when you look at artificial intelligence it's really machines with humans. It's clinical decision support, supporting the radiologist, supporting the doctor, supporting the clinician, supporting the nurse, not replacing these people. That's where we see the burgeoning industry of applying AI and ML to healthcare today, and where it's going to be for quite some period of time. So I could have focused my section of this in a number of different areas. I chose computer vision because that really aligns best with the use case of fall prevention in the hospital. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the foundational capabilities that Intel's working on to enable this use case and others. When it comes to perceptual computing, we really want to mimic the human perception system. So if you look at the eye there in the diagram, you can see something called RealSense called out, 3D vision sensors. So we actually are working with Accepto on use of our 3D cameras that really can help better track a human body, a skeletal tracking system and so forth. So if you really want to detect actions in the patient room, such as a patient's waking up, sitting up, about to get out of bed, having 3D camera technology is one great capability that can be applied. Some other places in healthcare where this technology has been used are gesture recognition. So you can imagine command and control in a operating room setting where it's not the doctor can't easily scrub back in. Also, in China, there's a novel use of this with autistic kids in a center for autism, where they're interacting with virtual reality, and the 3D camera RealSense is used to track their emotions, the emotions that are tied to their facial, the facial features as they're interacting with the system. So there's some really great places this can be used. If you look to the right of the diagram, that represents the visual cortex. So I've listed Movidius here, but really it's a broader area of what we call accelerators for computer vision. So Movidius is a company that we acquired a few years back that is really focused on low power computer vision at the edge, using something that a term they coined, the visual processing unit. With this capability, computer vision, or this need, you really need options really from edge to cloud, from the device all the way up through the cloud environment. You can imagine for a smart camera that you might want to do some deep learning inference on the camera itself, or on a battery powered device like a drone. It's impractical to record all this video, ship it up to the cloud, and analyze it. It's challenging from a networking perspective. It's challenging from a data storage perspective. So what you really want to do with some of these video use cases is do the algorithm development and training in the data center. But then when you're actually looking at the raw video streams and doing inference, do that on the edge. So really from edge to cloud across the board. And then lastly, at the bottom, one fact about Intel that few people know is that, or many people don't know, is that we have a very, very large software development competency, tens of thousands of software engineers. So it's not just about the silicon or the CPUs. Part of a good chunk of that is enabling tools, enabling technology, and optimized software. So we recently announced something called the OpenVINO toolkit, which OpenVINO stands for the Visual Inferencing and Neural Network Optimization Toolkit. And it's really designed for solution providers or software developers to enable computer vision solutions. It integrates with a bunch of the well-known open source computer vision SDKs, but it also has something I'll talk about in a minute that can optimize a deep learning application for a number of different environments. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in the context of this use case, this case study, I should say, which is with GE Healthcare. So I think probably everyone in the room is familiar with GE Healthcare, one of the top healthcare providers, solution providers in the world. In this case, we're talking about some of their imaging solutions and their CT scanner. They are one of the leaders, certainly in the industry, in applying artificial intelligence to imaging solutions. The use case that is called out here is their CT scanner, where if you can see in the top right, you've got a number of different medical images, and they have deep learning models that can classify those images automatically based on what part of the body it is. So it's a brain image, head, neck, chest, abdomen, etc. The reason they do this is because when the end user is interacting with the images, depending on what part of the body is, they want to provide them with different tools, different annotation tools, and they can provide a more seamless user experience if they know automatically, what part of the body it is. So they were doing a lot of deep learning using convolutional neural networks in their data center, And they wanted to deploy the inference portion of this right on the edge where the scanner is. So in real time, the images would come off and they would be classified. So they worked with our OpenVINO toolkit to get much better performance on their on this architecture than they were getting before. And so that using the system they already had with this optimized software, they could get multitudes better performance than even what the requirements were. One of the reasons I like this use case is it's if you think about the way this is deployed, where it's embedded in the software, embedded in the CT scanner, it's really invisible to the users who interact with this. They don't know or don't care that they're using sophisticated artificial intelligence. They might be curious as to how the solution knew what part of the body it was, or maybe not. But I think it's a really good way where you can see how it makes it easier for the industry to adopt as the technology sort of fades into the background and just becomes an AI and ML just becomes embedded in the workflow for the clinical end users as they have today. So I think this is it for me. Then we can take some questions, but touched on a lot of this. Where does Intel play in the AI ML? Of course, in health and life sciences, my industry, but elsewhere. The bottom row is not going to be a surprise to anyone. Computer chips, in this case, 3D cameras and visual processing units and other edge-to-cloud capabilities for computer vision. I mentioned software, huge effort around optimizing software. So there, all of the top deep learning frameworks and machine learning frameworks, from Spark to the machine learning libraries running on top of it, to Caffe and MXNet and TensorFlow. There's Intel optimized versions for all of these to do more with your existing technology. And then lastly, we do a lot with R&D and research and academia around this, and also quite a bit around influencing government policy with our teams that work with various governments around the world. So I think with that, we have about 20 minutes. If there's questions in the audience for any of the speakers, I'll have a seat.
How do you see the solution that you have in the patient rooms today with computer vision can scan and extend to the rural areas and to the homes of the elderly as the population of the aging population increases, both on the clinical side and on the health side, preventive side, as well as mental health, including communication with the family members and whatnot. Do you have any vision on that, of how this is going to play beyond the walls of the hospitals?
Well, one area that I've not recently, but a few years ago, spent a lot of time in Intel with aging and de-aging in the family sector. And so I think, just like today, we talked about the in-hospital patient room environment and using technology like computer vision to make that some of those use cases more efficient. I think there's equally a great opportunity for helping elders live more independently in their home for a longer period of time. So it's basically shifting them from a higher cost environment, be it most expensive being the ICU, least expensive being there, safely in their own home. There's a number of companies out there that are working on those kinds of solutions. And then of course you've got a large number of companies working on remote patient monitoring solutions, Intel included, basically trying to get a more continuous environment of monitoring for chronic disease managing patients versus the waiting until they come into the doctor's office.
It's demonstrated how you're shrinking the whole technology. You mentioned the previous chips, so there's neural computation acceleration that can be shrunk down so they can even fit into a small, tiny camera. And we embed those into what we call our airline units, so this systems we use for recognized action and to classify how people are, what they're doing and whether they require help. So this is one huge step to put those units also at home and at a low cost also. And personally, I think, having seen that from my relatives, that the moment when you leave your own used environment, especially if you're developing an early dementia, is well, you see the people deteriorating rather fast. As soon as they leave this environment they used to have always lived in, probably they're not even happy. They're not even happy. So I think that will be really a good choice, a chance where we can help them. So we can help them maintain their independence, so that they get help when they need it, and probably you could simply wave as a system and you would establish automatically a communication to the son, and then send additional help if necessary. The system can probably already judge whether it's necessary to call an ambulance or call additional help.
I think my mom will move too much of her hand calling me every hour because I happen to be her favorite son. My grandsons particularly. Neil, do you have anything that you want to add? Is there anything that you think from the clinical trials and the remote monitoring of the patients that fits into your arena?
I think in the context of care management, you're seeing Medicare, CMS, and other insurers who are reimbursing for remote patient monitoring, telehealth, virtual, non face-to-face procedures like for behavioral health. So there's certainly recognition with payers, as well as you're seeing a lot of providers who are starting to pursue this. I think what's going to actually be important, particularly for the AI community and companies that are providing solutions, is outcome tracking. I think that has, there's still a lot more work that can be done, meaning based on the thesis for a lot of these programs is that it's going to improve outcomes and reduce costs. So the more that people providing technology solutions can track outcomes and correlate that or attribute that to these services, particularly measuring them against the same or similar populations, that's going to be really important.
So for decades, there has been a drive for reducing costs in healthcare, and as Chris pointed out, the percentage of our GDP and the cost of healthcare in North America is significant. On the other hand, what I see that the trend is actually improving the focus on quality of care while reducing the cost, which for decades it has been actually the opposite. The two of them are the tension points that it has been going away. And what I personally see is that actually better analytics and predictive analytics actually is going to close that gap and take these two conflicting vectors that were 180 off from each other and forcing them to come closer together towards a better direction, towards a reduction of cost at the same time improving the quality of care. Do you three gentlemen also see the role of healthcare going that way because of the direction that machine learning and the technology in general is bringing together?
Well, I think around the world, in many countries, just the healthcare reform, moving from fee for service to fee for value, and paying for the overall health of the patient versus each individual touch point or test that has been done is generating a lot of demand for solutions like those we talked about today. We get to use machine learning, we use other kinds of techniques for risk stratification, identifying which are the highest risk population patients, so you can apply the scarce high-touch resources you have to those high-risk populations. So I think part of it's the industry itself adjusting to payment reform and that healthcare reform. But I think it's a really good sort of confluence between that and the readiness of machine learning and AI that can help make clinical users more efficient.
I don't have any other questions. If anybody from the audience has any questions for our panel, you can get the microphone.
On your website, I am Jason. Thanks for the talk, really fascinating. So One question that I have
Please
here.
stand up because of the light, we can't see you.
Thank you. So as an internist, one question / concern that I had about the computer vision technology and really deploying that in a patient setting for continuous monitoring or actually at home. I think there is a privacy concern and treating patients as data or someone or a disease state of fall versus someone's grandmother or mother or wife with human dignity. What happens when these patients get changed in the bed or they have to go to the bathroom in the bed or in a home, and then there is a machine algorithm watching that and that data maybe get fed. Other people watch it or that actually gets stored. So a lot of concerns about privacy and how data in recent media. How do you guys kind of think about balancing the utility of these technologies with concern for privacy and human dignity?
That's an excellent question, and we had this issue in our clinical study. So in case the patient has a visit from the doctor and comes in a situation that requires privacy, we had to install even a kill switch. So a switch where you could turn off. It wouldn't turn off the device, but it would definitely turn off the camera or the audio. So your system would go blind on them. In general, I see it less critical, but I spent a lot of thought on it already, because for the following reason. In our case, in our scenario, the data, what we have, so the visual streams that we record will never leave the device. And even the camera that we use is right now an IP camera. It is really only connected to the machine or not to the complete network. So we have even separated network ports to guarantee an air gap between them. So that's not possible even within the constrained network environment of the hospital. Even if the hospital is being breached, we would have to attack our systems to go deeper and to get to the visual stream. And for the machine itself, the machine doesn't really have problems. Was concerned with seeing somebody going to the bathroom. But as we have an facial recognition system, the system can be, of course, also configured to recognize that you. Well, it's pretty easy to see if somebody's interested because we change of color already. So that the system automatically shuts off and also demonstrates this. In our case of the hospital, you could even show very illustrative, because we have a camera with a pan tilt, so it's zoom unit, and it just discreetly turn away. So I don't see a huge issue there, especially as the data that in the end is here, even if it would be transferred to another server, would be the movement of your joints, so basically like a skeleton that you would see, like an X-ray image of you. So there would be nothing that could be embarrassing or really even easily related to your person itself. In the end, the action is you see sitting on a toilet on your screen, that is not an embarrassing thing. So it's pretty much. You would not see the person, you would not see an image in any form. So the concern is of course real, but as long as it doesn't really leave the domain, I think the benefit outweighs a lot the risk.
I want to add to that and point to 3 key points. Number one, the detection is about detection of normalities versus abnormalities versus the discrete actions or the events that are happening in real time and watching the video. Obviously, if you are doing, if you want your privacy, there's no video, as Stefan pointed out, that somebody is watching you as you're going to take a shower, or you're going to the bathroom, or if you're picking your nose, perhaps. The key thing here is the word significant events. Significant events is reflecting the events that are normality of a person of interest or occasion of interest. If the person of interest goes to the bathroom, and usually they take 10, 12 minutes to be in the bathroom or in the shower, that is normality, that the semantic data that is captured by the machine recognizes that the patient is in the shower, not the fact that you actually see the patient in the shower. The second thing is if the patient post 12 minutes in average is spending more time in the shower, then the audio system will detect the abnormality and whether the water is running and whether the stream of the water is, the sound of the stream of water is changing, which means that the person still is washing their body, or whether they just are standing there and because of the depression or dementia that they have, they're just basically sitting or standing under the shower. Now, we might be physically hurt and sometimes we're tired and we stand more than 12 minutes on, for example, Friday, which is the last day of the week before the weekend starts, and you are dragging yourself that day, and your shower takes 17 minutes. But by the fact that actually the stream of the shower still reflects that you're standing versus you're laying down on the floor of the shower, that can be the significant event that the machine can detect and recognize whether there's an abnormality and whether the machine can provide the sound and the noise saying that, Jonathan, are you all right? Do you need any assistance? Right? These are the minute little details, but the question about privacy is an amazing question, and it is a very legit and big concern in general. But reality is nothing leaves the device. Nobody is watching you. There is no big brother other than the events of interest that can impose risk to your health in general.